Brian Schumacher. Came with Plantz.
When they explain the experiment, it makes a little bit more sense. So for those of you who aren't like super familiar with beer hops, or seed cones of the hop plant.
I guess it's not gonna work because it's too low.
And they're used as a flavoring agent and as a stability agent in beers since the 11th century. So they've been around for quite some time. And they contain humulones and other alpha acids, and that when these humulones are brewed or heated, they form isohumulones, which is what actually gives beer the bitterness that people like refer to. So for a perfect, totally fresh batch of beer, and this like never happens, one bitterness unit it equals 1 part isohumulone per million. But this isn't true for most beers. And this concept is kind of the basis for our experiments. We're going to test kind of whether or not that is actually true for beers, but we know it's not, but we're going to see how close it actually is. And then a couple other things you need to know about isohumulone. It's photodegenerate, so degraded by light. That's why beer is in dark bottles when you buy it, because otherwise it gets that kind of skunky flavor about it.
Yeah. And if you guys ever like some recent dark bottles, if you ever look at a Corona, they always mark to put a lime in. It's so you get the acidity and to get rid of kind of the skunkiness because of the photodegeneration of clear bottles. What we're going to pick up on is flavor is time dependent, but the parts per million of isohumulones isn't. So even though a beer may not have the same bitterness it did when it came out of the brewery, we'll use UV vis to detect the parts per million of isohumulone. And what we'll do that by is at 274 to 275 nanometers from what the data we've seen. We're going to detect an absorbance, and 50 times the absorbance will be our parts per million of isohumulone, which is equal to 1 bitterness unit, is for beers.
And then like Sam's saying, what we actually find out is that over time, as it photodegrades, that the isohumulone is no longer 1 part per million of per IBU. So what we would like to test is also using mass spec, because that, or HPLC, sorry, not mass spec. We'll use HPLC on a standard that we found, which was a little difficult to come about because it's now an actual medicine, so it's regulated by FDA and all that jazz. But using that standard, we're going to compare to a few beer samples, hopefully one that's really bitter, one that's not too bitter, and then from there you're able to use that fit, and we'll be able to hopefully figure out the exact parts per million and then compare the parts per million for each sample to the bitterness units that we found in the UV vis, which should still be constant bitterness units because the color shouldn't change as it photodegrades, only the flavor. And then hopefully we'll be able to see a difference and more not see that the isohumulones degrade over time. Beer be skunky.
And for those of you who haven't researched beer quite as much as the three of us have, when you go on the internet or when you go on to like Miller's website, they will report the IBU for each beer. So we're looking at that comparison of what we actually find. It's that kind of the idea behind it. And like the bitterness units that are reported, there are people that like more bitter beers, so they look for that. That kind of makes sense. I didn't really know that.
Yeah. Any questions?
Do you know which beers you're going to be sampling at this point?
We're going to go through Miller, and we're probably going to do something like kind of a low-end beer.
Probably like Miller Lite and like Cotton Hellas or something.
And then like an IPA, something like India Pale Ales tend to have a lot of hops because the whole point was you need a lot of acid to preserve them over long voyages back centuries ago. So it's going to have a higher hop content. So just to see that difference between two beers.
We also discussed comparing Miller Lite to Bud Light to see kind of the difference.
Yeah,
I guess I think we're leaning towards something more that we know is going to be distinct.
Yeah, that's one other thing is the rumor is Bud Light used something called tetra hops, which is like a hops byproduct kind of thing, but I don't know how you test for the difference. So